Welcome to the Clearground Show. I'm your host, Dr. G, with a PhD. It's going to be a bit of a wacky Wednesday in terms of news. It's all over the place. And these are all things that I found pretty interesting. So we're going to talk about energy prices in the EU and what's causing them to skyrocket. We're going to talk about Facebook fact checkers. Facebook was recently sued, and what came out of that lawsuit was a startling admission of what a Facebook fact checker is. Now, from there, we're going to go back to our usual stuff. The UK has put in a new health restriction for travelers in between the ages of 12 and 15. Then from there, we're going to go to Jake Tapper and Amy Klobuchar having a really ironic meeting about masks. We'll then go over a couple of mandates and what the Supreme Court has to do with one in New York and then the new California mandates. Then we'll talk a little bit about this recent benchmark we've reached in COVID deaths, according to NBC and MSNBC. And we're going to end the day with a T-cell study that's really promising and everyone should be really happy about. So without further ado, let's dive on in. So this first story comes out of the DW.com, and the title is "The EU Warns of Fuel Poverty Due to Energy Price Crunch." European Union Labour Commissioner Nicholas Schmidt on Sunday warned of a rise in so-called energy poverty in Europe this winter due to the sharp rise in energy prices. Now, for definition's sake, a household is said to be in fuel or energy poverty when its members cannot afford to keep their property adequately warm at a reasonable cost. In September, the European Trade Union Confederation warned that more than 2.7 million people in Europe could not afford to keep their homes reasonably warm even though they had jobs. Last week, Germany slashed its tax on renewable energy by a third. That levy accounts for 1/5 of German consumers' power bills. France is now offering low-income households €100 to offset the additional cost of heating a home. So related to this topic, I decided to look into the European Commission, and they released a article, or I guess a document, on October 13th of this year, talking about how to tackle the rising energy prices. So in section 2.1, they discuss different causes for the current spike. So I'm going to highlight the second paragraph here. As natural gas prices are a fundamental determinant of electricity prices in most of the EU, these dynamics underpin most of the current increases in the latter. In addition, electricity prices are also increased because of seasonal weather conditions, low water and wind over the summer. This has resulted in a lower production of renewables in Europe. So what's happened every time historically you can't rely on renewables? Straight to coal. So here's a look at the chart of wholesale electricity and wholesale natural gas prices in Europe. Now look at 2020 and 2021. That spike is insane. Alongside this chart, they released a table describing the prices of wholesale gas and wholesale electricity. Now, if you look at the total of Europe, wholesale gas from 2019 to 2021 is up 429%, the price of wholesale gas. Now, the price for wholesale electricity is up 230% in that same time frame. So climate policy and climate science are very heated subjects, and they intertwine with each other all the time. So if you're looking for more detail on that, I'm going to cover stories in the future, of course, of these kind of things. But the expert Bjorn Lomborg, he was an economist, Swedish economist. He's very good at this. I'm going to link his Twitter down here. If you guys want to find out daily stuff on this kind of thing, please follow him. Now let's see what's going on with those Facebook fact checkers. This story is coming out of the New York Post, and it's an opinion piece by the reporter John Stossel, who is a very famous reporter, and he's been around for quite a while. So the title is, "Here's Where the Facts About Me Lie. Facebook bizarrely claims its fact checks are opinion." So John Stossel filed a lawsuit against Facebook for defamation, and in that lawsuit, Facebook responded in court saying that their fact checks are merely opinions, and therefore they're immune to the defamation suit that Stossel brought, which is a startling statement. So what's the lawsuit about? John Stossel made a video that said California wildfires were mostly caused by poor government management. Facebook censored that as misleading. They linked to a science feedback post that puts the following quotation in quotation marks, as if it were something that John Stossel said. The quote was, "Forest fires are caused by poor management, not by climate change." To which John Stossel never said that. Facebook reviewers took that quotation from someone else, or they could have just made it up. So in his video, he acknowledges that climate change has made things worse. He just argued that government management was a bigger factor. At this point, Stossel asked all the science feedback reviewers about their quote misleading quote end quote label, and two of them agreed to go on camera with him for an interview. So he then asked them what was misleading about his video, and they surprised him by saying they hadn't even watched the video. They offered no defense for posting words in quotation marks that he had never said. So basically, under the guise of fact checking, Facebook is able to throttle different articles that it may like or may not like. So for example, this is how Facebook portrays the fact checks on their website. Quote, each time a fact checker rates a piece of content as false, Facebook significantly reduces the content's distribution. We apply a warning label that links to the fact checker's article disproving the claim. This is really bad news. So the fact checkers are opinion pieces basically, and they are telling Facebook which opinions are the right ones to have without even in this case particularly reading or watching the video. So what is that? That has lots of implications for everybody that wants to post content. If they're not even going to look into the content you're posting and just by fiat decree that it's incorrect, factually incorrect, we're going to have a problem. And you can see this manifest everywhere. I mean, COVID right now is huge and it's a hot topic. How many of those have been totally checked out before calling them false? Climate change is huge. Every scientific debate and policy debate that's coming out right now that it has the ability to be fact-checked is being fact-checked by Facebook and other organizations. And the problem is we now see these fact-checkers are basically con artists. So as more of these stories come out, who are we going to believe? How are we going to be able to trust things? It seems to be, it's a pretty scary place we're in right now. So moving on to some COVID news, Sajid Javid, who's the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care of the United Kingdom, recently announced that there was going to be COVID passports for people, or for kids, ages 12 to 15. Let's hear that real quick.
And from today, I can confirm that the NHS COVID Pass is being rolled out to 12 and 15-year-olds for international travel, allowing even more people to be able to prove their vaccine status for travel where it is needed. From today.
Just another COVID policy to add to the list. You know, I've been wondering since all these policies have been added, if just one day it's all going to terminate, so like there's going to be an expiration date in the policy and then everything's boom back to normal, or how exactly we return from this kind of policy or all these policies. It's an interesting question, and I really have a hard time imagining that any time in the near future we just go back to things as they were in 2019. I think these are going to be here to stay for the most part, and that's just not good, I don't think. Now let's watch an interesting and ironic exchange between Jake Tapper, a CNN host, and Amy Klobuchar, a senator in the U.S.
There's something that happened Friday that I wanted to ask you about, if we can bring up the picture. You were at the funeral for former Senator Bob Dole, and you were seated, there you are. You're seated next to a Republican Senator, Ted Cruz, who, as everybody can see, is not masked, despite rules at the National Cathedral requiring all guests to wear masks indoors. Now, you're a breast cancer survivor. You're still recovering, I guess.
I'm 100%.
You're 100% better, but you're still at risk of infection because of this fight that you won. What was going through your mind there, where Ted Cruz pulls up next to you and doesn't have a mask on, even though the rules are, please wear a mask to protect you. You wear the masks to protect other people.
I think people should wear masks, especially when they're in settings when they're supposed to. I think part of our duty as civic leaders is actually to model behavior, because it's not just about masks, it's also about vaccines. And Ted Cruz, he's gotten a vaccine.
So to Amy Klobuchar's credit, her and Ted Cruz are actually friends, or at least good acquaintances from what I know about their history. And they've discussed quite a few things together in policymaking and those kinds of senatorial things. But what's ironic about this is Jake Tapper spends about 20 seconds describing how Amy Klobuchar is a breast cancer survivor and why masks are important for protection. And they're sitting together in a room, it looks like less than 6 feet apart, and he's just going on about Ted Cruz not wearing a mask to protect Amy, and he's not protecting her. It's such a funny thing how they can sit there and him in particular, Jake Tapper, just talk bad about another senator who, by the way, she admits is vaccinated. And it's not a good look. It's not a good look for you to tell somebody to do something while you yourself aren't following it. Now, to be fair, I don't know CNN's rules. Maybe they don't need masks anymore inside if you're vaccinated or whatever the rules might be. But the point of his statement was that Amy Klobuchar was sort of vulnerable due to her breast cancer situation, and Ted Cruz should have protected her by wearing a mask. Jake Tapper, why aren't you protecting her by wearing a mask? And the answer is pretty obviously clear that in this particular COVID era that we're in, the correct moral thing to do is follow any arbitrary rule in any arbitrary building. So, wear your mask to the restaurant table, but then once you're seated, take it off and breathe freely and talk and laugh. All of this stuff just really doesn't make sense, and it's going to implode. It's going to fall in on itself. Speaking of decisions that don't quite make sense, let's take a look at New York and the Supreme Court. This article comes from CNBC, and the title is Supreme Court Rejects Bid to Block the COVID Vaccine Mandate for New York Health Workers. So originally, the legal challenge was filed by a group of 20 doctors and nurses who argued that the state's vaccine mandate violates the First Amendment to the Constitution because it fails to include a religious exemption. So on Monday, the U.S. Supreme Court denied an emergency bid to block the enforcement of New York's coronavirus vaccine mandate for healthcare workers. So the request for a temporary injunction had been presented to Justice Sonia Sotomayor, who is assigned to handle cases from New York. The court denied that request in a one-line order that did not provide any reasoning or explanation. Justices Clarence Thomas, Neil Gorsuch, and Samuel Alito, three of the court's six-member conservative majority, said in the order that they would have granted the bid to block the mandate. So now that the Supreme Court's not going to block this thing, in a court brief responding to the healthcare workers, New York Attorney General Letitia James denied that the emergency vaccine rule shows any hostility towards religious beliefs. Now, it might not show hostility towards religious beliefs, I guess. I'm just taking her word on that. I'm not a lawyer or an expert on law, but it does show hostility to scientific inquiry and thinking, especially when, as we've discussed many times on this show, and I will do it once more with the new study at the end of this episode, that there is, at the very least, reasonable discussion to be had about vaccine mandates and healthcare workers and who's been exposed and acquired immunity. All these things should be on the table to be discussed, not just one way out of the pandemic, and that being the vaccines, because that's not the way out of the pandemic. Again, we've talked about that for a while on the show. So just as Neil Gorsuch wrote, and this is at the end of the article, that, quote, New York has presented nothing to suggest that accommodating the religious objectors before us would make a meaningful difference to the protection of public health. The state has not even tried. Moving on to another example of hostility to thinking and logic, let's go check out California. This article comes from the AP. California brings back mask mandates as virus cases rise. So California is bringing back a rule requiring people to wear masks indoors, a move aimed at containing a new type of coronavirus as people gather with family and friends during the holidays. The Newsom administration announced the new mandate will start Wednesday, today, and last until January 15th. The order comes as the per capita rate of new coronavirus cases in California has jumped 47% in the past 2 weeks. On the subject of masks mandates, Dr. Gailey, who is the Health and Human Services Secretary, said that it's a critical time where we have a tool that we know has worked and can work. Now, California had originally lifted its statewide mask mandate on June 15th for people who were vaccinated, a date that Newsom heralded as the state's grand reopening. But since then, county governments covering about half of the state's population have imposed their own indoor mask mandates as case rates surged with new variants. So finally, how is this happening in California? Newsom has issued a lot of other coronavirus mandates, including requiring state employees, healthcare workers, and soon, public school students and teachers to be vaccinated. The governor can do this because California is still operating under an emergency declaration that Newsom issued at the beginning of the pandemic. That emergency declaration will remain in place until either Newsom lifts it or the state legislature votes to end it. Give these people an inch and they just keep going miles and miles later. If you can get out of California, I would recommend doing so. I don't think this is going to be lifted anytime soon, as the majority of the legislature agrees with Gavin Newsom. And this is going to be used in several other cases. There's going to be a climate emergency, and they'll be able to shove down a bunch of stuff down the California population's throats. And so if you can get out, I would get out, but I know that's tough for a lot of people. So good luck to you Californians. Godspeed. Now let's take a look from ABC. The title of this article is A Defining Tragedy. U.S. COVID death toll eclipses 800,000 as the winter surge intensifies. So on Tuesday, the United States reached yet another staggering milestone with 800,000 Americans now confirmed lost the coronavirus, according to newly updated data from Johns Hopkins University. Now, clearly, as we've shown many times before on this show, it's not equal across all ages. Obviously, the older ages are affected significantly more than the younger ages. But with this number, and I quickly checked the Johns Hopkins website and I didn't see it, but how they defined fatality either with or from COVID makes a big difference. And I don't know if they made that delineation because different states define it differently. So this number may be inflated. Now, that's not to say COVID is not dangerous. Of course, depending on your age and comorbidities, COVID can be very dangerous. That's just to say that I don't know if this 800,000 number is as accurate as the claim is. But continuing on, when the first COVID-19 vaccines were administered last December, many Americans hoped the shots would herald a return to normalcy. However, since last December, an additional 500,000 Americans have died of the virus. Of those, just shy of half, 230,000, lost their lives since April 2021, when President Biden announced the vaccine was now widely available to every American over the age of 18. This is a pretty incredible thing. So we had significantly more people die this year than last year, with a full year of vaccinations and something like over 60% of the American population fully vaccinated, and boosters are on the way now. Now, COVID was politicized significantly last year, as well as it has been this year. For example, do you guys remember when President Biden said this when he was running for president?
You hear nothing else I say tonight. Hear this. Anyone who's responsible for not taking control, in fact, not saying I take no responsibility initially, anyone who's responsible for that many deaths should not remain as President of the United States of America.
So remember, the claim there was the president was responsible for the deaths. Just by the sole fact of him being the president, he was the leader of the country saw deaths while he was the leader. Therefore, he was basically the main cause of the death from a political standpoint and policy. So if we continue with that standard, it's not looking too good for Biden, and he's had a whole year of vaccines. The ABC article then very strangely compares the number of deaths from COVID, and they say that they're now higher than the number of Americans who have died from age-related illnesses over the last 4 decades. Now, why they make that response, I have no idea. I mean, they acknowledge in the sentence that it's been 4 decades worth of deaths, and COVID passed it up. So I guess that's saying that COVID is so, impressive at killing that it did what AIDS could do in 4 decades in 2 years. But that is just a terrible comparison. Let's take a look at AIDS compared to the flu, for example, in any given year. Now, death from HIV and AIDS in the United States since 2000 and before 2000 has been under 20,000 every given year and declining and now flatlining a little bit after 2010. Now, comparing to the flu, since 2012, we haven't had a year with less than 20,000 deaths in the flu. This comparison really doesn't make any sense to me. I think the diseases are so different. Flu to HIV, COVID to HIV. I mean, HIV is closer in deaths per year now to drownings than it is to the flu and than it is to COVID. Again, none of this is to downplay the tragedy of the loss of life to COVID. It's just that these particular articles don't resonate too well, I don't think. But we will end this episode on a high note with a great study that was just released on T-cell immunity to the Omicron variant. Briefly, before going over this short paper, it's important to mention once again that as far as we know, Omicron is a very mild version of COVID, which is great news. So this version of the paper was posted December 9th of this year, and the title is Minimal Crossover Between Mutations Associated with Omicron Variant of SARS-CoV-2 and CD8 plus T-cell epitopes Identified in COVID-19 Convalescent Individuals. So basically, how good is the acquired natural immunity from COVID versus the Omicron variant? So again, this is a super short paper. It's in the description if you guys want to check it out. I'm going to go straight to the discussion because it pretty much summarizes the findings, and I think these are really cool. So here's from the first sentence of the discussion. This study demonstrates that despite the substantial number of mutations in the Omicron variant of concern, in this population, only one low-prevalence CD8 plus T-cell epitope from the spike protein contained a single amino acid change. No other mutations were associated with our previously identified epitopes. These data suggest that virtually all individuals with existing anti-SARS-CoV-2 CD8 plus T-cell responses should recognize the Omicron variant of concern, and that SARS-CoV-2 has not evolved extensive T-cell escape mutations at this point. So we covered it a long time ago, so I'm going to just briefly remind you guys real quick that the epitope is the part of the antibody that reads the antigen. So that's a very important part for the response of the immune system. The data from this paper suggests that virtually all individuals with existing anti-SARS-CoV-2 CD8 plus T-cell responses should recognize the Omicron variant, and that SARS-CoV-2 has not evolved to escape T-cell mutation. So basically, this paper says if you have gotten COVID-19 and you have T-cells, those guys are going to recognize Omicron, and that recognition is going to allow you to mount a substantially stronger defense than if you didn't have those T cells, which is great news for everybody that has these T cells. The paper does suffer from a very small sample size, but these results are promising, and I look forward to more studies just like this one. And with that, we'll call it a day. I hope you guys have a great Wednesday. If you like today's content, please share with your friends, tell them to subscribe, let's start some reasonable conversations, and enjoy this video. I'll see you guys again on Friday.
I was blind, I'll do anything to change your mind.
Oh my lord, he's coming.
More than